And we are back. Another edition of Kevin's Corner, NFL Combine Week version. This will be heavy Chris Ballard-centric. We'll toss in the Chris Ballard interview that we just got done recording with the GM less than an hour ago. We're recording this late Thursday morning, so we've heard a lot from Ballard. I mean, if you couple this interview we're about to play for you, which is just north of 20 minutes, and yesterday you had the podium session and then the spillover that he always does with the local media. I mean, you're probably looking at about 40, 50 minutes of Chris Ballard from the last couple of days. So Eddie Garrison, we will give away our takeaways off of the Ballard comments. But let's go ahead and toss that again. This is Chris Ballard with us Thursday morning, the wake-up call. Myself, Kevin Bowen, and Andy Sweeney live at the Combine.
Chris Ballard sitting down. He's giving us hell because
you thought we were the Patriots.
Well, no, it's not our fault. But they sat us next to the New England Patriots. How are you, sir?
Connie, I'm good. No, Connie, he's pointing me this direction. I said, "What the freak is this? We're going to the evil empire right away."
They wanted to chat with you next. So I figured you could just slide over there.
Yeah, you'll just slide. Yeah, we're stuck between the Titans and the New England Patriots. How about that? We got the Jags to our right. Well, it's good to meet you, General Manager Chris Ballard, with us here as we're hanging out live at the Combine. I feel like I'm contractually obligated because I'm a media member to ask you about Michael Pittman Jr. and those conversations, what he means to the organization. I'll ask you this. Is there more pressure because you know everyone's watching this one because of what he means on the field, off the field? He's obviously a great player for you guys. How are those conversations going, and maybe a little bit more pressure what Michael Pittman means to the Indianapolis Colts?
No, I mean, look, I think we all know Pitt's a really good football player, and he fits us. He fits what we do, fits our culture of what we're doing internally. His agent he's got a really good agent. He's been great through this entire process, and it's just one we'll just continue to work. We'll work especially through this next few days and into next week to see if we can get something done. I'm encouraged about where we're at, but we still got a little work to do on it.
You feel like you're close on a long-term deal?
I don't know if you ever feel like you're close until the actual contract signed. I learned that a long time ago. But you think you are, and then they're always delicate with negotiations, and you just diligently work through. Mike Bloom does an incredible job for us, and he kind of knows where, what we have available from a financial standpoint, and then plus the other things we want to do and trying to fit it all in. He does a tremendous job, and that's always part of the equation. So, but we're optimistic about where we're at.
And I assume if you don't get that long-term deal done by Tuesday, you would tag him?
It's a tool we have. Hopefully we get something done. Never had to use it before, and hopefully we get something done before that moment.
So if you don't get something done Tuesday, you would let it play out?
Didn't I answer this question yesterday? That's just loaded. It's like I can't give
The tag deadline is Tuesday.
Yeah.
Is it long-term deal or
hopefully we get something done.
Chris Ballard with us here on the wake-up call. A showdown here. I'm in the middle between you and Bowen. By the way, we do have a clip of you saying freaking Bowen several years ago. So you probably have no idea.
I say that all the time.
Well, see, at some point we may need you.
And it usually doesn't start. The second letter's not usually an R.
We have a dumb bud. It's been used. Rick Carlisle has put our dumb bud to use in the last several weeks. I was going to say my last name's Sweeney. We may need a freaking Sweeney that we can kind of mash them together.
Just ask questions about White House and you'll get it.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That'll be that. We'll keep that to the end of the interview. Obviously, talking about Anthony Richardson, you were asked about him yesterday. Not pushing that. It's good that his rehab is going well. How does he look, and how have the conversations been where you make sure that he's not doing too much too early?
No, that's a good question. His doctor's been heavily involved. Dr. Elatrosh did it out in California, and he's been a great resource just from a checking standpoint. All right, are we making sure we're hitting the benchmarks that we need to hit? We're not moving, too slow, but also moving at the right pace. And then between him and our rehab team, and then a couple other people that he's been working with for a few years, there's been really good communication and dialogue to what, where we want Anthony to be at this point, then plus when we get to April, May, June, and we're in a good place right now.
Will there be anything different, like mechanically, with him?
No.
It'll be all.
No. There won't be any changes. The good thing is there wasn't structurally anything wrong with the shoulder. Much different than Andrew's case, where Andrew, had a torn labrum. So a much different rehab than Andrew's was, and it's not as quite. It's a serious surgery, but it's not near as labor intensive in terms of the surgery when it's not a labrum, not a torn ligament.
He is Chris Ballard. He's here with us live at the Convention Center, year 8 for the Colts GM. You seemed to express a good amount of regret yesterday about the wideout position. And I'm paraphrasing here, but maybe the lack of whatever support you gave Reggie Wayne and that staff last year, coupled with you're really bullish on this year's draft depth at wideout. Could you expand a little bit on the regret from last year and not giving that group enough?
It wasn't as the regret came like when Doolin came. When you lose a good player, it's hard to replace that guy. And so and look, some of those guys, they gave us some good snaps and did some good things, but finding consistency out of that number 4 and number 5 is something we're looking to make sure we shore up. Getting Doolin back will help. His rehab's gone really well. It was a freak accident, with the ACL. I remember watching the tape over and over again going, how did this happen? He's on grass and he just makes a post cut and, the knee gives out on him. So, just a little bit of bad luck in that circumstance. And then, the depth part of it, finding a guy that, like Doolin's value is that, one, he's a core special teamer. He does a lot of the dirty work, at wideout, and he can do it from 3 different spots. And I always felt that he was one of the most undervalued players we kind of had just because of that role. Zach Pascal filled it, for a few years, and then Doolin kind of stepped into that role. So having your number 4s really has to be able to play multiple spots and give you snaps on teams. And I'm telling you, that's a unique thing when you got a guy like Doolin that can do all of them. That's got all Pro Bowl talent as a teamer, then also fill in if he's got to play wide out and actually start a game or two. You're still in good shape with him.
And you feel this crop in this draft is, might compare to that 2020 group that you might have 4 or 5 Hall of Famers in that crop.
Well, I don't want to stamp them as Hall of Famers yet, but they're it's a very talented deep group, which is good.
I look at wideout. Again, Chris Ballard with us here at the Combine. Josh Downs seems to be the ideal complement to what you have in that room. How much is getting a little bit more yard after catch?
I think as he gets, he's still a young player, and even from a physical development standpoint, he's still young. His body's still maturing, and I think that as he gets stronger, and then plus he adjusts to how people are playing him. Like when you start watching the tape, the second part of the season, people were trying to take Josh away. He became really a dangerous weapon for the offense, and especially on money downs when you got to have it. So I think we've designated him as a slot only, but I thought there were times last year where he showed he could play outside too. So we think he's got great versatility. He's got really good upside. Josh, and he's everything you want. Like he works, he cares, he's tough, he fights through things. Like all the stuff you like about him is why he's going to be a good player.
You expect Grover and Julian Blackman to be back?
Well, I think with all our free agents, we've had good discussions with all their agents. You'd like to say absolutely, like to have everybody back, but that's not always realistic. At the end of the day, whoever we do end up getting back are the ones that we were able to kind of fit in the plan of what we have to try to, shape this team for next year. And, even the guys we don't, sometimes it just doesn't work out, and sometimes they get more money at another place that we just weren't able to do. So we'll see how that works out.
Would you say the realistic nature to it is you want to do something else, and if you bring those top 4 back, if you will, that can kind of hamstring you a bit?
I think you always try to get your own guys back first. That's always the priority. One, because you know them and they know you. All right, so it's one of the funny things with especially, and I think the fan base, I think the media, I think even internally, like you always see your own players and you see kind of the warts on them, and then you see the shiny object in free agency that you've never lived with, and you don't know the warts. And I think that's always a kind of a balance that, and it doesn't mean you dislike the player, but maybe if we go get this other guy that's a free agent, maybe he'll fill the role better and he's a shinier new object. But that's not always the case. We're always going to lean towards trying to do whatever we can to bring our own guys back. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
He's the general manager of your Indianapolis Colts, Chris Ballard, here with us on the Wake Up Call on the Fan. Your tight end room, the last few years you put a lot of draft picks into that tight end room. Jelani Woods, it's terrible the setback he had this year, not being able to play. Maybe not a deep draft class this year at tight end. You could talk to that, but what do you make of your tight end room? How much work do you think needs to be done there?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think in totality, it ended up being a productive room for us. I mean, I think when you add up kind of what everybody did together, it ended up being a productive room. Do we necessarily have, I said this yesterday, we don't necessarily have a Kittle or a Kelsey, but we have really good players in that they all have a little bit different skill set in what they can do. And I get points in the season, they all made a play that helped us, from Granson, who is sometimes he even for being an undersized guy really battles as a blocker. Mallory, who we got to stay healthy and get him a little stronger, but he did some really unique things in the passing game that we liked and created some mismatches that were really good. And then you talk about Mo, who all Mo does is show up and do whatever he's asked to do and do it at a good level. So in terms of the room, and then when you talk about Jelani, who's really got a unique skill set because of his length and his ability to run and stretch the field. He's really good when you're talking about the shallows, the seam routes, the dovers, the long crossers that you can run with him, and he's a big target for the quarterback. So getting him back will be a big add.
Okay, Chris Ballard is with us here live at the Combine, again inside of the Convention Center. Chris, year 3 it will be for Gus Bradley in this defensive scheme. What is it about Gus's scheme that you like and you and Shane wanted to retain?
Well, I mean, we've, after year 1, with him, and we had a bunch of, I want to say we had a group coming off a tough 21 season where it didn't end the way we wanted, with a lot of veteran players. And, we ended up signing Gilmore and had some vets. And then we said, you know what, we're going to go back and try to get younger and develop those. So the simplicity won. And that's where I would think that it's been fun to watch. Gus is smart now. He is a smart man. He's a smart coach. I thought he did a really good job adjusting some things last year to what we had, and then we'll continue to build on it. We've done some good things. We've got to eliminate the explosives. I think we all know that. Making a team have to earn it down the field is a big part of this game. We'll play great defense for 50 snaps in a game, but there's 7 or 8 that will give up a play, and so we've got to eliminate that. Some of that was youth, and some of it was these guys just hasn't been in these situations. So I think they'll get better. I did think there was areas we did improve. We're pretty good on third down. The red zone was better, not where we want it, and that's an area we got to take even a bigger step for. We'll always be front driven. You've got to keep 9-10 guys in the stable that can rotate in and take snaps where those other guys can really give the max effort when they're in the game. That's always, and that's hard, to have 9 or 10. I thought last year was a really good group. I mean, I thought that between you got your first 4, then you have your second wave of guys. And there's some young guys we're excited about. Like, I still think Quiddy and Dio will take a whole nother – I think there's another step they can really take. I think Eric Johnson will continue to prove from a small school. We picked up a kid from Dallas last year that kind of got glossed over, was Isaiah Lamb, that we think has real upside as a rusher. And I think you saw he was only active for 5 or 6 games last year, but when he was active, we saw some really good things out of him. He just, small school, young, needed a year of work, and it'd be fun to watch his development this offseason.
Chris Ballard with us here on the Wake Up Call on the Fan. We've done a lot of position stuff. I wanted to ask you this because one thing that kind of struck me, fans after a loss, people get angry, and I'm talking about the heartbreaker, obviously losing to Houston at the end of the year. You had that press conference after the season. You talked for like 45 minutes, an hour or so, and I thought at the end you kind of bared your heart out, your soul almost, where you're like, hey, that game was on Saturday. I came in here on Sunday and I was alone in the facility. What was that day, that night, and that next day when you're in the facility and you were right there from making the postseason? What's going through your mind? Kind of what's the emotion as you're sitting there in an empty facility and you're alone in your office?
It's anytime you get that close, the division title on the line, then you don't finish it out. And look, it's happened, in 21 when we didn't finish it out at the end of the year, and then in 23 we don't finish it out. And it was and what I will say about the game, like it was a heck of a game versus Houston, which, you look at it, kind of hindsight now. I mean, Houston was playing really good football at the time. I mean, they went and they handled Cleveland pretty easily in that playoff game, and then, really for a half gave Baltimore a good run. And it was a heck of a football game. And at the end of the day, they made, one or two more plays than we made. And that can be a tough pill to swallow, but one you have to swallow. Mm-hmm. You can't just ignore, that you didn't get it done. And that's it's frustrating, but the things I was encouraged about was to watch our team compete, the intensity, watching a lot of these young players compete. That was encouraging for the future. I suck handling loss. Like, it's like game day, I'm the worst. There's nobody. I mean, I turn into, like, the fans have no idea. Like, I turn into them. And if they saw it, they would go, oh, okay, that's how I act too. Except they're probably not punching walls and throwing chairs against the
Sitting in front of you in the Cincinnati press box, I was reminded about that.
Was there a chair thrown in that Texans game?
No, that was pretty good.
Okay.
That was pretty good.
Okay.
That one was pretty good.
But like fans don't see that. They see the result. But I mean, you're in there the next day. This is your livelihood, and it's like you were that close, and you were that close.
Yeah, and look, I mean, that's the great thing about our league. It is so like the difference between 6 wins and 11 wins.
It's unbelievable.
It could be 6 or 7 plays in a season.
Well, think of your game with Cleveland earlier in the season. Yeah. I mean, literally. You may not want to. Yeah. I mean, a call here or there, a play here or there.
Try not to get fined here on this Thursday morning at the Combine. We are live.
I don't quite have Mr. Irsay's stroke.
We are live here at the Combine. Chris Ballard is with us. Chris, year 8 for you. I don't need to remind you of these numbers, but it's 1 playoff win. It's 0 division titles in your era. Why don't you feel like you've had more success?
I think Kevin, I think you know me well enough to know like either you get it done or you don't. I'm not going to sit here and the easy thing would be to make an excuse. And look, at the end of the day, not getting the quarterback position right has hampered it. And that falls on me. I don't fall on anybody else but me. And it's something that, you learn and you grow from. I think we've done good with Anthony. Now, I think time will play out. But my failures in that space and with a position that's so important, you have to get that right. You have to have a guy that can actually lead you and make plays in critical moments. That's the great separator in our league. I think you see it every year in the playoffs. I think you see it with teams that really excel and go forward. They have a guy at that position that, when the game's on the line or when there's real leverage points in the game where you need to make a play, he makes a play.
Do you view roster building as there are positions that are more premium than others?
That's a good question. I mean, look, I think you know me by now. I think the front, both O-line and D-line, are critical to winning this league. I do. And I'm not taking anything away from the other positions, but I think as the season goes on, it shows up more and more. Teams that are good up front, usually, at least it gives you a chance each and every Sunday. I think we've all seen when you're not good up front, the result of that. Unless you have just a true magician back there at quarterback that can somehow overcome it. But I always my mindset has always been that way. And look, I learned that from a long time back in Chicago, and then looking at what Coach Reed. I mean, Andy, that was one of the things Andy always. I mean, you never go short up front. Now you look at how their team's built. I mean, it is, it's quarterback and then it's up front. I mean, and I just think in the long run, that still wins in our league.
Last one from me. You mentioned explosive back about a month and a half ago. You want to get more explosive. How much of that is simply you just think the presence of number 5 under center gives you that, and how much of that is no, we need to go outside the building and make sure we do a little bit more there too?
Well, unequivocally, I think the quarterback's going to help. I think it showed when he was in the game. I thought one of the really cool, and it sucks that we didn't finish it out, but the Ram game, I thought, like in the second half, we played like crap in the first half, and credit to the Rams. I mean, they kicked they kicked the crap out of us.
Dump that, Mark.
Yeah,
please, thank you.
Scratch that one out. They kicked the crap out of us in the first half, but the explosives that he was able to create in the second half was really fun to watch. But when you have, like, that's the one thing about like Jonathan Taylor. Like, Jonathan can turn a 1-2 yard run into a 40-50 yard run. Making sure we add another element to the offense that's really good after the catch, that can create the play that's not there.
Chris Ballard with us here. And by the way, the Jonathan Taylor, that Houston game, one of his no doubt finer games. Need to ask you this.
And again, that was Chris Ballard with us Thursday morning at the Combine. I guess just overall, Eddie, let's start here. I obviously want to parse out Michael Pittman Jr. stuff, Anthony Richardson stuff, anything else that you find noteworthy. I don't know. I could be nitpicking a little bit here, but I would just say overall, it's a bit of a terse might not be the right word, but just not as open as I recall Ballard being. And again, I could be looking way too much into this, Eddie, but I want to give my raw thoughts on what just what I observed from him again yesterday, today in the interview. I think there's a little bit of an element of he knows if it doesn't go right this season, which I don't think that's the expectation, but if it doesn't go right, I mean, he might not be here in 2025. And I don't know if we've really ever been.
What's right?
It's a great question. I'd like to think a playoff appearance, but, you always have to see, I think, the full season play out. I mean, certainly if Richardson, whatever, goes through the same injury situation they went through last year, maybe you don't necessarily, go exactly off of that. But I just think there's a little bit of, or get off the pot. Like that time is now, and it's part of the reason why I asked him that question about, his era and the lack of results off of that era. I mean, if you really get into it, Eddie, and you look at the GMs hired either in the year that he was hired or the year before, the year after that, and you look at them that are still around in the NFL, frankly, it's rather laughable, the amount of results they have versus Chris Ballard. I mean, you could point to Chris Greer in Miami, a few more playoff appearances, but or I think just one more playoff appearance, but certainly hasn't had the postseason success like Ballard. But whether you look at Brian Gutekunst or Brett Veach or John Lynch or Brandon Beane, I mean, so many of these guys, those resumes are just a whole lot different. So I would say just overall tone-wise, that was probably something. And I don't know, maybe it's just in general combine nature and you want to be reserved around the draft time. But I just tend to feel like Ballard's usually a little bit more on the open side with that. So that was probably one of my initial thoughts from him. Certainly enamored with the draft depth at wideout this year. I noticed a little yards after catch mentioned there at the end, which I think listeners of this podcast will know that's music to my ears early on. Nice update on Jim Irsay, I would say, there at the end, speaking with him for 30 minutes last night. Michael Pittman Jr. related, Eddie, he was very direct yesterday. I tried to parse him down a little bit there, but very direct yesterday on Michael Pittman Jr. will be on this team in September. I do find it interesting he won't commit to the franchise tag if they can't get a long-term deal done. Like, do you think if we get to Tuesday at 4 o'clock and they don't have a long-term deal done, would he let that 8-day window then play out for the start of free agency to get a long-term deal done? And I guess before you answer that, let's go over what all that means. We're recording this Thursday morning, February 29th. March 5th, Tuesday, is the franchise tag closing window.
At 4 p.m. Eastern.
So once you get to that mark, franchise tag's done. You use it or you don't. He doesn't sound like a huge advocate of using it necessarily.
It's a tool.
Yes, it is a tool. As soon as you said that, I immediately regretted asking the question.
It was like the same rehired or recycled speech he gave last year about Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, something along those lines. So, Eddie, if you don't tag him and you don't obviously have a long-term deal done, that leaves you 8 days until the start of free agency, March 13th. And I guess if you want to get technical, you would only have 6 days, right, until the tampering window opens up on Monday, March 11th.
See, this is where I get confused with all the verbiage and everything. Like, he's still technically a Colts player.
Right, but your free agents have that 48-hour window that begins just before the start of free agency to legally tamper. And again, I say legally tamper. I mean, again, illegal tampering is happening in downtown Indianapolis this very moment of you and I talking right
happened
now.
last night, for sure.
Hundreds of yards of away, 100 feet, frankly, away from where we are recording this right now. So that's just obviously risky. I mean, the tag is the insurance policy the Colts have. If you don't use it, now you need both sides to agree on the long-term deal. Like Michael Pittman Jr., there's no agreement with that tag. You can slap it on him and boom, he's under contract for the 2024 season. So again, just the how of it will play out, which I think listeners have realized that's kind of where I've been for the last month or so. He will be back. It's just, what does it look like? So I think that's a question that you have. I've talked enough. Anything Ballard related that stood out to you?
When I hear the things that I've heard about him regarding Michael Pittman Jr., it's kind of made me wonder if, and make me kind of believe, I think they're going to get a contract extension done prior to that franchise tag window, which begs the question in my eyes, as of yesterday and even more so today, is there another player that we haven't talked about that could get the tag, and there's a reason why they're trying to get an extension done with Michael Pittman Jr.?
I think Kenny Moore probably the only one that would somewhat qualify as that, but even then, I just think that's a lot of money to be paying slot, because that's more of a that's more of an outside corner tag money, not the nickel corner.
Yeah, today he mentioned about building up front and in the trenches, and he spoke really, really highly of Grover Stewart right after the start of the season, at the end of the season. So to me, that's where my mind went, is he's got such an admiration and appreciation and love for, the trenches on the offensive and defensive line, and such high praise about the person, player, and character that Grover Stewart has and is. It makes me wonder a little bit, with how much of a steal his last contract was, is there a possibility that he could be the player that gets the tag just because of the way Chris Ballard operates?
Yeah, I'll go back to the question. Is it a Twitter question today? I forget that they sent about, if you re-sign the big four, Pittman, Blackman, Stewart, Moore, is that it? Like, do you have what? And again, I threw that question to Chris earlier. Do you have else? And again, how does the tag play into that? How does the franchise tag alleviate that or help you out? If you obviously are heavily front loading a 1-year deal with that. A couple other things. Certainly would like to have Kenny Moore back. He mentioned that. The whiteout depth in 2024. He mentioned this at his podium session on Wednesday. Comparing it to 2020, where Pittman Jr. and T. Higgins were taken late, and Brandon Ayuk was late first round. Justin Jefferson wasn't even the first or second wideout taken. I don't believe in that draft. And expressing some regret, and I know he really harps on the Ashton Doolin, but again, to me, it's more of, boy, you need some other insurance there for Doolin, and not just banking on frankly, him to be that guy. And if he goes down, now you're in scramble mode trying to provide depth. really they were fortunate that Pittman Jr. and Pierce stayed as healthy as they did. They didn't have the ankle pop up for 3 or 4 weeks or something like that last season. So certainly is a huge fan of this draft depth at wideout here in 2024. The Anthony Richardson news item. I think it's good news that, nothing motion-wise needs to change with him from a throwing motion standpoint. And that was a question that I had. And I agree wholeheartedly with Ballard's comments Wednesday about, I guess it's nice that he's ahead of schedule, but, and I'm paraphrasing here, but, I don't really care. It doesn't really matter. We're going to be cautious, and frankly, I think they should be that. We've talked about the dates time and time again on this podcast. Nothing matters for Anthony Richardson until mid-May. And you can debate how much that even matters. I tend to think it does in practices throughout the offseason program, OTAs, and the minicamp. That's really beneficial for a second-year QB who played 173 snaps as a rookie. But I know it's not the end-all, be-all. At the end of the day, September 12th or whenever that Sunday, and more or less July 28th or whenever, training camp starts. Those are the dates that matter a whole lot more. So yeah, that was the Richardson item. Backup quarterback was a little interesting. He's not someone that sounds majorly focused on getting the same stylistically type of QB to Richardson. It's more of can you keep the ship afloat? I don't care how it looks, but can you keep it afloat? So, that, and I probably am there as well. I'm more of can you Band-Aid it up for a couple of weeks if you need it as a quarterback? Can you, 3 games? Can you win 1 of the 3, 2 of the 3, et cetera, et cetera? And then also, I'm probably more of a human guy. I'm probably more of are you accepting of the role? Can you help develop Anthony? Can you really, be more of the tutelage guy than, oh man, I'm itching to play. I would love, I'd love for Anthony to go down, and you let that bleed into your actions. I know that's probably a little bit of a callous take on it, but that's where I kind of look at the backup role for this team. And then certainly, again, how things play out for Minshew here over the next couple of weeks will be huge. I would disagree with him, and we'll see how his actions play out. I would disagree on he's not very gung-ho about a veteran cornerback as an absolute must to add to this youth in the secondary. I think it should be explored. I tend to think that's the better route to go. I know he would probably say, well, there's great draft depth there, but still, I think it's good to get a veteran guy into that room, especially if you do lose a Blackman in free agency. You don't want to put all of that veteran leadership on Kenny Moore for the back end of that secondary. They'd probably go and make a veteran, safety room. So yeah, I think that covers a lot of the big stuff.
What'd you think of his response about Gus Bradley when you asked about him?
Yeah, I don't love one of the words that he used to describe a reason why he likes Gus's defenses. I like the simplicity of it. I don't view that as a major compliment of a defensive scheme. I understand there's an element of it helps young guys maybe get on the field earlier. It's easier to communicate on game days. You're not overly taxed from a mental standpoint. I'm more of these guys are pretty freaking smart to get to this level in the NFL. You can't just be some idiot by any means to have gotten to this level. The football intelligence is very high. I tend to think, throwing a decent amount from a variety of scheme, variety of coverage, variety of blitz, variety of pre-snap, disguising, that sort of stuff, the very nature to week life in the NFL, I tend to think that is where you can create the old Charlie Weiss schematic advantage per se. And you got to do something against these offenses. The offenses have so many damn advantages built in for them. You don't have many built-in advantages defensively. So I view that as one of the very few areas to try that. And Ballard, I don't think, does view it necessarily in that light. So, again, that would be one that I would disagree on. I think he's a little higher on that tight end room than most. And it's been a question that, Eddie, you and I have thrown at each other for the last month or so. Again, what does he think of that group because if you look at it resource-wise, he's actually invested a decent amount draft-wise into tight end.
4 picks in the last 3, was that
4
the
picks
number?
in the last 3 drafts, and not 4 seventh-rounders.
No.
A third, a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth. I mean, that's pretty notable draft capital for that position. Is Bowers the outlier? You know, that is the question probably you would have. There is a little bit of like a Ballard bird on one shoulder for me that's like Brock Bowers is not 6'7", 250. Like, if you look at it, whatever Bowers weighs in at, I forget if it's later today or tomorrow, Eddie, he's going to be on the small scale for tight ends.
Mm-hmm.
Very much so. I mean, I just walked away from his podium session. I mean, he's not this. I mean, if you looked across the room at the various tight ends at the podiums, he's probably the smallest one. If Ballard is going to spend the 15th overall pick on a tight end, does he say, no, it's too early for exception of the rule? You know, that sort of element to it. So, you know, I know tight end was a question that we wanted to get to. I did like that yards after catch comment, though.
Mm-hmm.
I did like that. I think that's really, really important for them. So I think that probably covers most, if not all, of the main Ballard stuff.
One more thing. He thinks that Kwity Paye can take another step. To me, who was the other player he mentioned in that pairing?
I think he mentioned Dio.
Okay.
Right.
I think it was Dio.
And then he started to kind of get into the depth chart in general on defensive line. Isaiah Land was a guy that he had mentioned. Yeah, when I hear him talk about the D-line and pass rush, he doesn't sound like a guy that is like itching to find another one to add to that group. Now maybe. So
there's a sigh of relief for the fans out there that don't want to see him waste another early pick on one, possibly.
Yeah, and I understand where you're going with that comment, but just because you've wasted picks or not hit there doesn't mean you stop necessarily with that. One thing I do want to add, this kind of goes back to Wednesday because I know it's a popular topic. Wednesday, did you see that NFLPA survey?
Yes.
About where the Colts ranked in some of those areas? Again, players from each team vote anonymously on their own team's, you know, whatever you call them, lifestyle, work, you know, I'm trying to think of the exact phrase to use for it there. Basically, working environment. And the treatment of families went from a B+ to a D. That did kind of stand out. Part of me as a father of a young 2 children wanted to be like, yeah, welcome to the daycare shortage, people, from a child care standpoint. It doesn't shock me. You can't find any daycare support at Lucas Oil. I say that a little bit in jest. You would think you'd be able to find a handful of people to staff that room and pop on Peppa Pig and Daniel Tiger and call it a day.
Or Bluey.
Or Bluey. Certainly, yeah, probably Bluey more than the other two.
Paw Patrol.
And exactly, look at you, Eddie Garrison, and call it a day there from a.
Need a babysitter?
Yeah, gosh, they're one of 7 teams, right? That they don't have game day care. Did I see that in the?
You are correct.
In the mention of it, yeah. Food and cafeteria about average. Weight room dropped a little bit. Training staff dropped a hair. They love Shane Steichen. Travel went from an F to a D, so I guess you're making strides there. I think it's a tad overblown, if I'm going to be totally honest with you, the results from this survey. If you looked at some of the grades around the NFL, a lot of them are pretty poor.
Yeah.
Do I think there are some rather obvious things that you could take care of? Yeah, I do. You know, I don't think it's like, all right, some of the stuff like, I mean, daycare during the games. I mean, come on. Like, I mean, you could easily take care of that if you need to. Ballard, and judging by his answer from Wednesday, he's probably a bit frustrated by some of the answers, like weight room related, food and nutrition related. That's been a big undertaking for him since he has taken over. He really wanted, and they did, remodel the facility and the weight room and things like that. So that is something that I think – he wants changed and he probably doesn't love seeing that. But again, for the most part, I'm not going to fret too much over these answers.
Yeah, me either, because it's like most of these guys have been around the Colts. There's not many outsiders that have come in.
Well, and is it? I don't
to have an experience to compare it to.
Well, that is a good point. I also think it's not like this is seriously hindering the Colts from attracting free agents or keeping free agents either. So, yeah, I'm not going to lose too much sleep over the old NFLPA survey.
Did you see that the Chargers are one of the teams that does offer daycare, but they charge like $50 for a kid, and then each additional one is like an additional like $75 or something? I can't remember.
I did see that, and I don't have the Twitter handle in front of me, but I literally burst out laughing when I saw a response to that tweet say, "That's what happens when your franchise has Antonio Cromartie and Phillip Rivers."
That's good.
How good is that?
That is great.
I mean, that is outstanding. That is the beauty of Twitter. That's why I love Twitter, and I will always stand by it.
You think Phillip Rivers is the one who got daycare?
Can you imagine? All right. You imagine how thrilled they are if Antonio Cromartie's hurt and he's at home, and they're bringing I don't know, maybe he wouldn't even know all the kids' names to pack in the car, right?
It also does add up now, knowing that the Colts are one of those teams that doesn't have it, and you always see, like, whenever they pan on, like, to, like, family members, and they have an infant or a young child, the young child's right there with him, with the
funny
mom.
Thing, too, is I know the Colts have a room at Lucas Oil. I've definitely seen the room. I guess I'm a bit confused, but I don't know. Maybe it's like it's the room for like the parents to take the kids into, and there's not like, the parents can't just drop them off and then go back up to the suite or back to the stands to watch the game. So again, there's a reason why I didn't feel the need to ask him that when we had him on the show today. I just didn't find that super, super pertinent there. I guess last thing, anything you made from Ballard's answer on, just why his tenure hasn't had more success?
I thought he was a little caught off guard by it, and it took him a minute to kind of gather what he wanted to say, personally.
Yeah, there was a little bit of a pause there, if I remember correctly, at the start of that answer. I mean, certainly quarterback is that is a big part of it. Again, I would kind of go down to the trickle-down effect if I think other premium positions have been missed. That has hurt the ability to have more success or certainly try and sustain it for a few more years as opposed to going into year 8 with that. If you've got nothing else Ballard-related, Eddie, should we hop into Twitter questions?
Only 3 to get to. Casey is the Twitter question that you were referring to earlier in the pod. Seems like most of the local media is in favor of bringing a lot of the Colts' own free agents back. Feels like we're running back the same team we've had for 3 or 4 seasons and expecting different results. Michael Pittman Jr., Jonathan Taylor, offensive line, Grover Stewart, DeForest Buckner, Kenny Moore, Julian Blackman, Zaire Franklin. We've seen what this core of players can do. Are they placing that much pressure on Anthony Richardson to elevate the entire roster?
It's a great question. I've found myself pausing in recent weeks being like, wait, you can't run it back with those 4. But then I'm like, wait a minute. What are your answers if any of those 4 leave? And they're not great answers. I mean, we've gone over. I guess, maybe safety. Maybe Nick Cross takes a big jump and you patchwork it with a veteran and Rodney Thomas is still in the mix. I don't know. Part of me thinks this, and I think Chris kind of mentioned that when I asked him specifically about Grover and Julian. If they get a bigger deal elsewhere, are you re-signing 3 of the 4 and then you've got room to go do something bigger? Is that where that veteran corner kind of comes into play there? I do think the Richardson element of it is a huge, huge part of this offseason. It's why I wanted to get that last question into Ballard of when you talked about explosive a month and a half ago, how much of that is just strictly Richardson? Because he certainly does. I mean, there's no question he brings an explosive element to the game. I don't think that can be the end-all, be-all, and I'm glad he kind of threw in there the yards after catch part of it. But still, he should bring a huge part of that. We made the baseball analogy a million times last year after the draft of, he can be Adam Dunn for you, which you absolutely love, but you can't have the amount of strikeouts. And to be fair, in the small sample size, Richardson did not have a ton of strikeouts. When I think of strikeouts, I think of turnovers or, just total ineptness from an inaccuracy standpoint. That was not there. So that I think is very, very important. But Casey, it's a great question. And, we're about to get some answers on what they think of Nick Cross or what they think of the value of Julian Blackmon. And then again, how do you sprinkle that into other parts of free agency? I did think going back to Wednesday, the Ballard answer on free agency was a very similar to the rhetoric that we're used to. And that's where I would just disagree with him. You have to be accepting of the free agent market. You don't have to like it. You don't have to be a fan of it, but you have to be accepting and knowing that you walk into that store and those are the prices and the market drives it. And if you want to try and improve your team, you're going to probably have to do some things that fiscally you might not love. And I mean, hell, part of that is just welcome to life, but part of that is welcome to try to improve your football team with guys that have experience in the league. And that's what the early part of free agency is. When you bargain shop, you're largely going to get what you asked for. And that's, I think, a little bit of what the Colts have done in free agency.
2 questions left. Mihol and Ian. What would it take for the Colts to get Marvin Harrison Jr., and what would the pros and cons be? I don't know much about the draft process.
Well, it would, hell, Eddie, what do you think? 3 first-rounders?
I would say 2 and probably another second or third.
So your own pick 15, that's 1.
Depending on which team it is that you're trading with.
I'm trying to think, boy, didn't the Titans go from 15 to 2 to get Mariota, and the Eagles did something similar with Wentz?
Yeah.
Maybe not that far down round 1, but they made, notable moves up to that. I don't know. Would you have to get to 2? Would you have to get to 4? Certainly is it Arizona at 4?
Correct.
They could hold a king's ransom if they wanted to for that. I think it's entirely unrealistic. Let me just start there. And honestly, Eddie, I think there's some teams around the league, and we had Dane Brigler on our show the other day. He mentioned there's multiple teams that have Malik Neighbors above Marvin Harrison Jr. So I don't know. It would take a huge price for any draft to move from 15 to 4.
Yeah.
Period. But also, I think, and listen to Ballard. If he is gushing about this draft depth as much as he is, yes, Harrison might be in a different stratosphere, but still, I don't see him doing that. I guess draft-wise, Eddie, I get into this debate a lot with the draft guys we have on, and I struggle in the analogy game, so I hope this makes sense. But if you view the middle of round 1, and if you view edge rusher, and you view wideout as the 2 needs. Let's play out this gas store analogy, okay? You're heading to the gas station. You can only buy 1 item at the gas station each hour. You need a Reese's and you need a peanut butter M&Ms. Those are my 2 favorite candies, by the way. You walk in there.
Now, which M&Ms?
Peanut butter M&Ms.
Good answer.
And if the peanut butter M&Ms are wideouts and the edge rusher is Reese's, you walk into the store in the first hour, and you have to get both. You walk into the store in the first hour, there's 3 Reese's left, and there's 9 peanut butter M&Ms left. If you need both, you're going to buy the Reese's, you're going to buy the peanut butter M&Ms.
It's a very good call. I'm going Reese's.
Scarcity of it. And that's what I get into, I think, with this draft of, to me, that has to play into it. If you have the ability to come back in round 2 and feel like the depth can stand up there better than at another position, I think you have to tap into that there. So, yeah, the Marvin Harrison Jr. thing, that went away when, you started, what were they, 3-5 when they started to turn it around? Is that right? Yeah, that's when it went away for you.
By the way, Brock Bowers said today when he was speaking at the Combine that His meeting with the Colts was a formal interview, and he shared that, quote, everyone was in there. Clarified that there were about 15 to 20 people in the room during the interview. And you were talking about his size earlier. 6'4", 240 is what he was listed at this past season by Georgia.
Yeah, and again, I mean, 6'4", 240 is a good-sized tight end, but when you view it in Chris Ballard light, that's a little bit different than what he's drafted. Certainly Kylan Granson falls much more to that mode, but other guys, very, very different.
Lance Zierlein, he does NFL Network stuff, NFL.com.
Draft analyst.
Yeah, he has Malik Neighbors' player profile to Justin Jefferson.
Woo!
And Marvin Harrison Jr. to CeeDee Lamb.
How was LSU not better last year?
Well, that defense couldn't stop a nosebleed.
Gosh, unbelievable.
Final Twitter question goes to Benji. Given the Texans' success this season with D'Amico Ryans and C.J. Stroud, did the Colts hire and draft the wrong duo?
Yeah, I think that's a little short-sighted, frankly. First off, I don't think you could have gotten D'Amico Ryans. I think he wanted to go back to the franchise that he certainly had a hell of a career with as a player. Now, you can get into the Stroud debate. I can listen to that. And, Eddie, think about this time last year.
Yeah, you asked me if I'd cut my pinky off, and I said, oh, hell yeah.
Well, yeah. I don't want to paint that graphic of a picture, but I was long an advocate last offseason for trading up in the draft to be in control. Again, going to the old gas station analogy, I don't want other people, leaving me the candy bars and the fun dip that's left. I want to be the one walking in there making the decision myself. And Houston got that opportunity to make the decision of, if you want to list the four quarterbacks together, Bryce Young, Stroud, Richardson, and Levis, they got to be in a position where, they could pick one of the three. The Colts were one of two at that point. So that, I think, is something that you could debate. Did the Colts hire and draft the wrong duo? I think Colts fans are going to be very, very pleased with what Shane Steichen does as a head coach. And honestly, you can make the case, and Houston was fortunate that they didn't lose Bobby Slowick or Jared Draw Johnson at all this offseason, but they could be in a little bit of scramble mode moving forward if and when that time comes. I did notice one thing Colts hired. You see they made a few hires the other day, staff-wise.
Yes.
They hired the strength coach from Philly. You ever heard of David Ballou?
The name rings a bell.
Strength coach for Alabama. Someone's telling me that he actually interviewed for the Colts opening here. Wife's a Bloomington native. He went to IU, fullback at IU. He followed, remember Kevin Wright here locally, the high school coach? Yeah. He followed Kevin Wright to IMG. Originally, did some strength stuff there. Then went to Notre Dame briefly, was at IU, and Nick Saban plucked him from IU to be their strength coach down there at Bama. Someone told me that he interviewed for the Colts strength opening with Rusty Jones retiring. He wanted to bring some of his own staff, and I guess was told no. The Colts wanted to retain a lot of the guys they had here, strength conditioning wise. So I thought that was interesting, of a local name that I think some people are, more of our immediate audience here in Central
local
Indiana.
audience.
Yeah, local audience. Thank you. Will know, and could have been another Brian Mason situation there, but yeah, they opted to go with the Eagles guy, who I obviously would have a Shane Steichen connection on that end.
What? Really? You think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but he had a 4-hour interview with the Colts. I don't think this past weekend, but the weekend before that, but they elected to go in a different direction. All right, Eddie, anything else combine related, free agency related, anything I'm missing here?
I don't think so.
Again, stuff's going to continue to pick up. We'll give some other combine thoughts on next week's podcast. We'll obviously have a Michael Pittman Jr. update.
What, midweek next week, next pod, probably?
Yeah, certainly if, for some reason we get the long-term deal that, what Ballard said, he's encouraged by the progress.
Yeah.
Is that what he said on the Michael Pittman Jr. front there? So if all of a sudden that happens on Monday, no time to waste, or over the weekend, might as well do a pod then. So yeah, we will come back and start to get a little bit into free agency as well, as we are 13 days away from the start of that. We've got Combine stuff up on our website, 1075thefan.com. He's Eddie Garrison. I'm Kevin Bowen. Everybody have a great rest of your week.